they're pretty big, you know, bigger than a chipmunk for sure. That's like body size.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Wildlife Wednesday. My name is Tyler Greenley.
I'm Bo Weldon.
And we're so happy for you all to join us. This month we're going to show you guys some large carnivores, some cutthroat trout, and some pelicans. First off, we have our monthly carnivore update on grizzlies and wolves, featuring a lot of footage that Bo got over the past month.
Yeah.
Super cool. All right. Hi everyone, this is Tyler with your monthly carnivore update. This month we'll be featuring some colorful black bears, some baby grizzlies, and wolves hunting prey. Black bears as a species come in a wide range of colors, and this month we were able to find this incredibly beautiful cinnamon colored black bear who appears to be a year old, munching on the fresh spring grass. Black bears across their range come in a variety of colors, including whites, blondes, blacks, and cinnamons, like this one. Grizzlies, on the other hand, like this young grizzly bear cub here, tend to be a more characteristic brown, but they also have quite a bit of color variation. This cub is from the Lake Butte sow, and we're super happy that she has a new cub this year. The Lake Butte sow is very well known for keeping one cub for up to 3 or 4 years, which is pretty unusual. On the other hand, we do have other grizzlies that seem to have a much higher reproductive rate, including this grizzly who has 5 cubs, and this has actually never been recorded in Yellowstone or Grand Teton before, and is one of the records for the highest number of cubs in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, if not the world. Now, most grizzly bears keep their cubs for only about 2 years, and so the Lake Butte sow is pretty unusual in keeping her cub for 3 or 4 years. Here is a video of another typical grizzly bear family. This is 1063, and she recently came out with 3 koi, and we're really excited about this because this is actually her first litter that we know of that she has ever produced, and we've been waiting for her to produce a litter for a couple of years now, having observed her mate with a couple different males. And so time will tell to see if she's successful with this first litter. Wolves also have litters this time of year, and because the summer months are so much more difficult for them to hunt, they have to work extra hard in order to provide food for those pups, especially around the July, August, September time period, because that's when those pups are going to be growing the most. Here is a video of a Wapiti lake wolf chasing an elk, and this is a very interesting interaction for us to observe. Hunting elk during the summer months is incredibly difficult for wolves because they are quite large prey, and during the summer, elk are at their healthiest. And so, what the biologists in Yellowstone National Park have found is that elk between the age of 2 and 9 years of age are almost completely invincible to wolf predation. They are not predated on wolves hardly at all, and we can observe how difficult it is for these wolves to actually hunt elk in this video, where one of these mature cow elk actually chased this black wolf away from the other adult members. And here the wolf has to use its agility to jump through the sage to escape that elk. It's possible that this female elk has a calf stashed nearby, and so she is intent on defending that calf from this wolf. But this is just one example of why it is so difficult for wolves to hunt elk during the summer months. The elk are very strong and sturdy, and they will often work together to chase wolves off. Super cool video, with that wolf chasing those elk. That is, we don't see that very often on tour, but every month or so, someone gets some incredible footage, like Bo got, of wolves chasing elk or something crazy like that happening.
Well, and it's so unique too to get like the role reversal of the carnivores are chasing their prey, and then to have that kind of switch, and just goes to show the power of a lot of these prey animals, even though they they fall into that category of maybe they're being eaten, like they got force and they got power behind them. And you saw with that black wolf, like, well, my tail's between my legs. I'm getting out of here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was pretty special.
It reminded me a lot of videos that I've seen out of Africa, particularly like Kruger National Park, of lions going after Cape buffalo. Yeah. That kind of like cat and mouse predator-prey dynamic is pretty cool to witness. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was here in Wyoming.
It was, pretty cool.
Let's see, what do we got? We have Laura?
Yeah, so up next, we're going to look at one of the prey items that grizzly bears feed upon in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. We have Laura talking about cutthroat trout.
Beautiful fish.
Woohoo.
Oh, hey guys, this is Laura. I'm down by a Wyoming creek, which is home to native cutthroat trout. Cutthroat trout are relative to salmon and are found widespread across the American West in cold, clear, fast-flowing, well-oxygenated creeks and rivers. The name cutthroat comes from a red or bright orange coloration just underneath their lower jaw, so it looks like his throat has been cut. In the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, we have two types of cutthroat trout, which are native. We have the Yellowstone cutthroat on the eastern side of the Continental Divide, or the water that flows to the east of the high point of North America. And then we have the Snake River fine-spotted cutthroat trout that lives on the western side of that divide in places like Jackson Hole. Native cutthroat trout spawn in the springtime. Some of our other non-native trout will spawn in the fall season instead. But recently I had the opportunity to see Yellowstone cutthroat trout running up a tributary creek to go spawn, which means both male and female trout run up a fast-flowing creek to find a nest or a redd. Redd comes from a Middle English word, which means to clean or to clear an area of debris. Female cutthroat trout will create that redd, that nest, by turning on their side and then vigorously swishing their tail back and forth to move gravel into a trough and, of course, a mound. They're selecting certain style gravels, certain sized gravels. They prefer 3/4 inch to about 2.5 inch gravel pieces, which is the perfect size to not only create that mound, but also house the eggs as they incubate. Male fish come into the same area as the female. Just after she lays those eggs, he'll come and fertilize them. Once fertilized, those eggs get super heavy. They also get kind of sticky so that they'll nest into that mound. The trough performs kind of like a natural hydraulic, so that water will flow up and over the mound without disrupting the eggs on the mound.
Thanks, Laura, so much for all that great information on cutthroat trout.
Yeah.
They're, in my opinion, some of the most beautiful fish that, we have in North America with their different stripes and spots and patterns. And what's interesting is there's different regional variations. And so cutthroat trout have different colors depending on which state you are in, which is pretty cool.
They feel like an easy fish to brag about.
Yeah.
People always ask on tour, like, what kind of fish? And you go, trout. But let me tell you about these cutthroat trout.
Exactly.
Either the Snake River version or the Yellowstone. It's like, it's just an easy one to take some pride in as being like our local Wyoming fish. They're so beautiful.
They're really fascinating. And one thing I've been reading a lot about recently is how cutthroat trout actually cross the Continental Divide into Yellowstone Lake and into the Yellowstone River.
Right.
During the Ice Age, Yellowstone Lake used to flow south into Grand Teton, and cutthroat trout were able to migrate up into Yellowstone Lake. And then eventually they became separated because Yellowstone Lake, lake levels dropped, and then the river began flowing north into the Yellowstone River, into the Missouri and Mississippi, and that cut off the cutthroat trout from the original populations in the Snake River, and they diverged.
Right.
Which is just blows my mind, is super fascinating. Yeah. Well, up next, we have another predator of the cutthroat trout. We have Bo talking about pelicans, which is a bird that we get here surprisingly in the summer.
Always a surprise. People are always like, I think you just misspoke. There's no pelicans in Wyoming.
Or they think they're swans.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, trumpet swans. Yep.
Well, great. Here's Bo with pelicans.
Hey gang, Bo here, Guided Eco Tour Adventures. We're talking about American white pelicans we have right here behind us. We're currently standing at the Oxbow Bend in Grand Teton National Park. Welcome to summer in the Tetons. It's a beautiful time of year. These big birds behind us are kind of a treat for us here. Not a lot of folks come to Wyoming and expect to see pelicans, but it's true, they are here. So we're gonna jump in, learn a little bit more about these birds and why we love seeing them while we're on tour here in the Tetons. American white pelicans are a super fun part of being on tour in the summertime in Jackson Hole and the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. They are a seasonal species for us, only showing up in the summer months, and often are taken as a sign of spring when we see their large wingspans flying over the Tetons, over the valleys, showing us their little black-tipped wings that are quite unique to this bird. These birds have an enormous wingspan, actually the second average largest wingspan after the California condor, coming in at usually around 9 feet. These birds live somewhere between 15 to 20 years, and the reason they're coming to the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem is because this is where they breed. So on tour, oftentimes we see these birds in places like the Oxbow Bend or other river environments because they are fish eaters. They actually work together and will drive fish into shallower areas of water. And then using those large bills, they will scoop through the water to grab those fish. These pelicans don't dive like brown pelicans that some of you watching might be familiar with in your home areas, but instead bob their heads under the water to get those fish. Occasionally, these American pelicans will also eat crayfish or salamanders as well. Now, as they're coming up here, again for that breeding season, you might notice when you see American white pelicans that they have what's called a bill horn on top of their bill, kind of running parallel with the length of the bill. Looks like a small crescent shape. Both males and females carry this bill, and it's actually a growth that appears on the bill only during the breeding season. Both males and females will grow these little horns, as they are called, but the males are quite a bit larger than the females. These horns are then shed after the breeding season once the eggs are laid. Once those eggs are laid, the chicks spend about a month and a half with the parents, and then they separate to join other groups of American pelicans. After they've done their breeding here in the Tetons, these huge birds leave for their winter range. So we only see them, again, during the summer months, and then they disappear for us in the fall and will come back to us next year. Where do you find them in the winter time? Their winter range is usually around the Gulf of Mexico, California. Some are even in the flyway that'll go down to the coast of Texas. Others still might go all the way down to Panama. So again, only here for the summer months. Because these birds live quite a long time, this 15 to 20 years, it's rather fun for us to think about that some of these birds that we've been seeing consistently every summer, for example, in the Oxbow Bend, we might have been seeing these same birds for a very, very long time, coming back to a similar habitat to eat those fish and to raise those young.
They are a very cool bird for our ecosystem and quite beautiful as well. So now you know a little bit more about the American white pelican. Of course, when folks come out here, we love trying to chase around those bears and those moose, those big pieces of wildlife. But waterfowl like this play a critical role in our ecosystem, so we really appreciate them in these summer months. Love, of course, having you out here in the summer months, but if you're joining us in the summer, don't be alarmed about these big white birds. Those are our pelicans, and they belong.
Pretty cool footage there, you know?
Yeah.
A lot of our guides got some pretty funny videos of those pelicans, you know, trying to net the fish in the moving river. I don't think they were being super successful in that case, but pretty cool, yeah.
They're still working hard at it.
Yeah, they're still working hard.
Yeah.
I was laughing when that one pelican was swimming upstream against the current. They don't have like as well of webbed feet as like ducks and swans do, so I always imagine underneath them floating in the water, they're paddling super hard.
Working hard.
Exactly.
Gang, up next, we have the esteemed Sarah Ernst. Basically, everybody wants to turn into Sarah later in life, myself included.
Yes.
She has an arsenal of information out here, so if you have not been on a tour with Sarah, she's actually a guide that I would like to shadow. Sometimes we shadow each other because I haven't seen Tyler past like 5 a.m. in like 2 weeks. And so it's nice to like check in. Anyway, Sarah, if you haven't had a chance to go on tour with Sarah, an arsenal. Amazing. So she's up next, and she's actually talking about pika and other small animals that we have out here in this ecosystem. So check out what Sarah has to say about her pika.
Woohoo.
Hello, this is Sarah Ernst, and I'm out on a hike in some rocky country just outside Grand Teton National Park. We are in the habitat of one of the most elusive and one of the most adorable animals in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, the pika. So where do we go to see pikas in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem? Well, any big pile of rocks at high elevation will often do, but what's more important is that temperature. I would not look for pikas at anything over 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Have you ever been hiking in Grand Teton or Yellowstone National Park and heard something that sounded maybe like someone blowing on a party favor hidden deep in the rocks, a little eep sound? Maybe you catch a glimpse of an ashy gray animal running across the rock pile, and that would possibly be the pika. This is some excellent pika habitat right here. What makes this such good pika habitat is the pile of rocks behind me. This one happened during a landslide. You'll also see them up canyon walls and in the high country and above the tree line. Wherever there's piles of rocks, you might find pikas here at higher elevations. They need these piles of rocks to elude predators. They're pretty skilled at darting in and out of the paths they know so well. And also to store those hay piles they need to survive the winter. The average pika weighs about 5-6 ounces. That puts it at about the weight of a baseball. And they're about the size of a baseball too, maybe a softball for the bigger ones. Pikas look like a little furry rodent that you might find at a pet store, maybe a chinchilla, a guinea pig, but they're actually closely related to rabbits. They're in the lagomorph family. Other animals you might see in rock piles like these would be the golden mantle ground squirrel, the marmot, a much larger furry critter out here, and we have a couple of varieties of chipmunks as well. All of those animals hibernate for the winter except for the pika. Now, when you've got a place with its winters as long as ours, 6-7 months in the high country, that can be a big problem if you are trying to live off the land and you're covered with 6 feet of snow. So pikas deal with our long, snowy winters by gathering big piles of hay, which they cure out in the sun to stash underneath the rocks to use during the winter. Pikas spend half their lives in the darkness in these rock piles under deep layers of snow, eating the hay that they had stored over the summer. That makes them one of the busiest animals here during our short snow-free months, trying to gather enough to survive. So we're starting to get a little bit worried about these beautiful but very sensitive animals. We're experiencing hotter and drier weather across the last couple of decades across the American West than we used to, and that's posing several survival threats to the pika. Hotter summer day temperatures keep pikas indoors for longer, meaning they can't be out there gathering the hay they need to survive the winter. It's also changing the type of vegetation they have access to, as we're seeing snow melt out earlier and the pattern of plants alter across the ecosystem. Across some populations, such as the Great Basin population, pikas are retreating from lower elevation areas, some by around 1,000 feet. The problem is, retreating to higher elevation areas, you eventually run out of room to go. Pikas are being monitored here in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem to see if they're doing the same thing. Interestingly enough, there are some pikas that have been able to survive at low elevation in places like Craters of the Moon National Monument, where they use cool lava tubes to escape the heat of the 100-degree days that are found out there in the summer. Multi-day tours are often when we have time to stake out these pikas and try to be able to film them and take pictures of them. They're definitely an elusive species, but boy, they're worth it. Aren't they adorable? This is Sarah Ernst with EcoTour Adventures signing off.
Thank you, Sarah, so much for sharing all that great information about pika. And just so you guys know, Sarah hiked like 8 miles to get
way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
up into pika habitat, which was pretty awesome for her to do for this video and everything.
It's a little embarrassing that I just went to a very level area to get pelican footage, and Sarah's like up above tree line looking for small, tiny gray rabbits in a huge boulder field. So again, Sarah's the best.
Yeah, she's incredible. She is one of the people who mentored me to be a guide, and so I learned a lot from her. And so if you guys ever get the opportunity to come out on tour with us, definitely ask for her. She is absolutely incredible. Well, before we move on, I do want to do a quick shout out to Michael K. Brown for sending us some amazing microphones. We weren't able to get it working for this broadcast, and it's just because we need a special attachment, which my phone doesn't have. By the way, we're doing this on my phone, which is kind of fun. And so next broadcast, we will have this up and running. But thank you so much for sending us this.
Really kind.
Everyone in the office was super excited.
Yeah.
They were all texting me like, Tyler, you got a package from Wildlife Wednesday. So thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. Well, guys, up next, we're going to go into our second favorite part of the broadcast, which is where we ask you all a trivia question and where we review last month's trivia question. But before that, we're going to go over our sponsored items for the month. And this month, we're just going to be showing you guys our web store. And so the web store is... you can go onto our website and check out all of the great items we have there. We have apparel, we have books, we have items that guides have made to put on the web store. And everything on the web store there actually goes back to the guides to pay for health insurance and to pay for stuff like 401ks and stuff. So you are helping the guides out when you go and check out that website and when you get something off of that. And if you're wanting to support our guides more, there is always the donations to the ETA guides page. And that's really important because, a lot of our guides are out there on their own time filming the footage, for this broadcast. And so this is a great way to support them. But enough of that, we're going to go over our trivia from last month. And then we have a new trivia question this month. And they're both about bears. So the first one from last month was, why do grizzly bears have such long claws? And thank you all for participating last month and answering to the best of your ability this question. We've had lots of great answers. And so the answer for this question from last month was B, grizzly bears have claws for digging, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
It's cool to think about them not in a forested environment and really being a specialist in the plains.
Yeah.
And being able to kind of cruise through Nebraska and Kansas and all these other areas where we do not associate them with, but having those little shovels will help with that survival.
And grizzly bears are a part of the brown bear species, and brown bears, of course, back in Asia still live in a lot of open country places like Mongolia and the Tibetan Plateau. And so in those areas, you can see those brown bears digging for roots and digging for animals like pika to capture and eat. And so, that's probably not too dissimilar to how it was historically out here on the plains of Wyoming and Idaho and Kansas and Nebraska. Pretty fascinating. And if you ever get a chance to look at a grizzly bear's claws
from a safe distance,
like if you look at a specimen, they're almost like shovels in a way. They're shaped more.
They kind of have that little concave.
They do,
inside,
almost like a spatula.
Yeah, that's a good way.
Yeah, almost like a spatula on the inside of their claw. Yeah. Versus other carnivores like black bears and mountain lions they're more like hooks, and they're actually shorter, but a lot sharper. So pretty cool. Yeah, and surprisingly, they're not used a whole lot for hunting. Like, of course, a grizzly can grab you with their claws and hold you really well with those claws, but they're not adapted specifically for hunting prey.
Yeah. One of my personal favorites of the claws for both species of bears, but for the grizz, when they're on the road or they're on like a riverbed, you can see how, for our toes, we think that they'd be gripping, but it is this little half step up, and they just kind of sit up there like this, kind of funny. Yeah. It's just kind of a curiosity that's wonder what that feels like to just have them be up like that, and then really cool with tracks if you're looking through mud flats, when it's there's the print of the pad, and then out in front are those little edges of those claws that just touch.
That is really fascinating to see that, because the bears are walking on their foot pads and their claws are up above their foot pads, which is really interesting. That's got to be weird.
I think it must feel weird. Anyway.
I'm imagining nails on a chalkboard, a grizzly scraping its claws on the ground. Well, great. We have our question for this month, and thank you once again all for everyone who participated in answering that question. This month, we're asking another question on grizzly bears. How many cubs can a grizzly bear give birth to?
What do we got here? A is typically 4, rarely 5. B depends on resources. C depends on region. Or D, all of the above. Okay.
Yeah, so give us your best answer to that question that you can think of, and leave it in the comment section. And if you guys are new to this broadcast, how this works is every month we ask you guys a questions. You have to answer it in our comment section. So if you're watching this on maybe a secondary page that we've shared this video to, go to the original post and comment under that so that we can see your answer. If you get it correct, you get entered into a drawing for a free item from the web store, which is pretty awesome. Yeah. So answer in the comment section below, and we'll get back to you on that question next month in August. Well, great.
Cool.
Up next, we have our first favorite part of the broadcast, which is where you guys get to ask us a question in the comment section. And then I have our iPad here, which is how we're running this broadcast. And I can actually see all the comments from you guys. And currently I'm seeing some cool answers coming in so far.
Okay, we got some in there. I like it.
And so I can actually see your questions here. And so feel free to comment under this video if you have a question about wildlife, about Jackson, Wyoming, about nature in general. We get people from all across the world who have different wildlife and different nature than what we have. If you guys have a question about, something going on in your hometown or somewhere else in the world, feel free to ask that also.
Yeah.
And what we'll do is we'll start at the very top of the comment section and then work our way down. And we did have a couple of guides in our comment section, so we might shout them out too as we go. Well, great.
Let's see who we got.
Yeah, we're going to go to the very top. Okay. And Dawn immediately says, Happy 4th.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, except Don, you're gonna have to change it to "Hey Team" because that's Bo's.
Oh, that's my favorite intro.
Yeah, that's Bo's favorite intro.
Yeah,
but
hey,
happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th.
And if you guys don't know, Don is a longtime viewer
Yes.
for us, and so we're always happy to see Don in our comment section. We have Susan saying hi to Bo.
Hey, Susan. Yep, I was out last month. I was on a multi-day trip, kind of going between the 2 parks, staying in hotels and things like that. So I was out last month, but glad to be back this one.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else we
Good to hear from you, Susan. Awesome. We have someone from Michael K. Brown. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Mike.
So Michael is asking or stating, my parents in Pennsylvania used to say, go red up your room, meaning go clean your room. And he's saying, funny how cutthroat trout red up their spawning area to build the mound. Yeah. That is super interesting. So for those who are unfamiliar, when cutthroat trout spawn, they typically swim up a river, either from a larger river or from a large lake to a small stream. And then the females will dig out what's called a redd, which is essentially a nest for her eggs. And then, it's pretty simple. Basically, they find a nice sandy or gravelly area and they lay on their sides and then they use their tails to beat the ground.
It's kind of cool.
It's kind of cool to watch. Yeah. There's a lot of great YouTube videos of salmon doing it.
Right.
And so she'll beat the ground with her tail and that kind of clears out all the debris and creates like a depression. Yeah. Then typically there's a mound at the base of this depression that kind of like shields the current and shields the water from sweeping the eggs away. And then she lays her eggs in this divot and then the male fertilizes them. And so that's a typical redd, which is very typical for species in like the salmon and trout family.
But go red up your room.
I know.
I've never heard that before.
I've never heard that before. We're both from Colorado.
Yeah.
We're not from Pennsylvania, so maybe that's an East Coast Pennsylvania.
But I kind of like it. I'm going to do that like when we're done with a tour, and I see Tyler out there and be like, all right, we got to go red up our vehicles.
Yeah,
we got to go clean them up. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, place-based.
Say it, on a multi-day, we're going to go red up the vehicle for tomorrow. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, sweet. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for sharing that. That's really cool. What else we got?
Dawn has a question about, I believe, pelicans. So Dawn's asking, a private club was allowed to eliminate some I think are pelicans, off a private lake for taking too many fish. Is it possible for them to deplete a lake? So for this question, I think it depends. Yeah. So pelicans are, so we'll just start out with what protections do pelicans have? So pelicans are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty, which prevents the take of all non-harvest birds. So that could be anything from a robin to a raven to a bald eagle to a pelican. Only birds that have official game status can actually be harvested, and only in their season and only if you have a tag.
Right.
And so like as a private individual, you can't go out and just shoot birds. And even collecting feathers is a little like, you don't really want to have those in your possession, especially a large collection, because they are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty. And so for a private entity, landowner, private company to get permission to like kill pelicans they're worried are depleting a lake of fish, would be pretty interesting. I wonder if that would be on a state level. It might be federal though. Like federal approval, since there's the Migratory Bird Treaty. It's like it's like the Marine Mammals Protection Act. Like you can't just like go kill marine mammals. There needs to be like approval from the federal government for that.
I wonder if there's some sort of like state federal relationship that the state can go to the federal side X number of times with a drafted proposal on behalf of those state residents.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or sometimes states are allotted a certain amount of take for that are considered like surplus animals, and they can't go above that take. And so they're like every year, this is just random. Like maybe Michigan has like an allotted amount of like 200 pelicans that it can take from a lake. For the entire state.
Right, statewide.
Yeah. And so sometimes that's how it works. in this scenario, we don't have a lot of conflict out here with pelicans per se, but I know a lot of places down in Colorado and then out near like Utah and California have some issues with pelicans.
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting to think about from like a political bureaucracy sort of like management viewpoint. Like how would people actually go about this? I will say that in most cases, even if an animal is protected by the Endangered Species Act, in the United States, there are certain cases where animals can be removed because of property damage or because they're threatening a resource or obviously human life.
Yeah.
And so there's got to be, in almost any species management plan that has been written, there is a section that talks about how an animal could be removed.
Some caveat because of that what if something could happen, a unique scenario, so we have this kind of back way to understand. If it makes most sense for this scenario, we have a channel.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And pelicans are a concern for a lot of people, especially anglers, who are spending, you know, a lot of money and a lot of time, you know, trying to go and catch fish. But I think there's also a lot of myth about what happens when pelicans visit a lake. Pelicans are specialized in catching very large fish. And not all fish within a lake are the same size. And most lakes are pretty complex and have deep sections where pelicans can't reach, and then they have shallower sections where pelicans can forage. And so for a population of pelicans or a flock of pelicans to deplete a lake would be, I think, pretty rare. Because fish resources are so sporadic, pelicans move around quite a bit to different fishing grounds. And it's just within their biology to continue moving from food location to food location. And so it would have to be something really small. And maybe with a population of fish that aren't necessarily reproducing. Like there's a lot of smaller ponds just throughout the US that have typically non-native fish populations that have been hybridized between two different species, and that prevents them from breeding in the wild. And so, and then they have to be like continuously stocked by some sort of fish hatchery. And so maybe in that scenario.
So pretty specific.
Pretty specific.
Yeah.
And out here, we definitely don't run into that problem. We have a lot of pelicans out here, but we have a lot of water and our lakes are really large. And our fish are continuously reproducing. And so pelicans are not feeding on small fingerlings and smaller fish. They're feeding on much larger fish. And so they're not depleting that smaller size category typically. And in deeper stretches of water too, like I'm just thinking back to my hometown in Pagosa Springs, there's a lot of like golf courses with lakes, but some of those lakes are like 20 feet deep. That's way too deep for a pelican to fish in. And so I don't think they would deplete an entire lake unless there were some pretty specific circumstances. But I do think there's a lot of myth also surrounding pelicans.
Like how much take they actually have. And I feel like that's could be a pretty classic fishing story. Be like, well, I didn't catch a fish today because I saw one pelican.
Totally. And I don't want to like throw fishermen under the bus. No. Fishermen are amazing people, but if you're fishing and you're competitive, you know, seeing an animal like an otter, a pelican, or even an eagle catching a fish near you can be, you know, upsetting, especially if you're having a harder day out there, casting your line and not getting anything.
Doing more fishing versus catching.
Yes. Sounds like when I go out fishing. I do way more casting than I do catching. Let us know in the comment section if you guys are fishermen and if you guys have had any interesting wildlife encounters while you're out fishing. You know, fishing, hunting, hiking, like those are great times. And sometimes, you know, you randomly run into wildlife when you're doing those activities. So let us know in the comment section if you've had any interesting fishing wildlife encounters. All right, let's see who else has asked questions.
Hello from Missouri. Hello, Missouri.
From Mike. And then here's one of our guides, David. And yes, David, Sarah is the best.
Yeah, David. Yep, you said it right. Good job.
Sarah's like the mother goose of ecotours.
She is. Okay, what else we got?
Here we go.
From David.
David said, I heard that pika means squeak in Russian. Can you confirm?
Yes, David. As many of you know, we all attended intense Russian language training before moving here to Wyoming. No, we didn't.
One of the prerequisites for working at EcoTour Adventures is knowing Russian.
This is just a little insight into what it's like to be in a room full of guides.
Yes.
It's basically like a small internet. It's like all of these different stories and all of this source knowledge. And David's just like tossing out this really cool question.
Yep.
Tyler, I've heard other things. What have you heard for this? I've heard like a peak.
I've heard peak. I haven't heard squeak, but I've heard peak from Russian, but I haven't like read anything like super conclusive on that. That's just what I've heard mainly from like other guides and stuff. So I've heard peak, which would make sense because a lot of pikas live up on mountains. Squeak would also make sense because they do squeak.
That is fun to be out there in the high country, or even there's places when we do like our Yellowstone tours and we're just pulling over to glass, to look for something else, and we hear that little meep, and you're like, oh,
that was so good.
Thank you.
I can't do it very well. Yeah. I've seen pikas, I think every single Yellowstone tour this month.
Yep.
Stopping at that one spot. We won't tell you where it is. It's a secret spot. But we do see them on tour occasionally, and actually we do get videos of them on tour.
It's hard though.
Yeah.
Because they're small and they dive into those rocks, creating those little hay piles.
Yeah.
So I guess if anybody has a different translation or they have any sort of Russian heritage and they know either squeak or peak, let us know.
Yeah, maybe leave us a note in the comment section if you guys find anything about what pika means in Russian. I will be very curious.
Yeah.
I will say that I have been seeing pika over the years in some unusual places, like pretty low elevation.
Yeah.
Like south of town at like 6,000 feet. Like
there's
some rock piles along the Snake River where you can find pika, which is interesting.
Cool.
So yeah, we're very lucky to have a lot of pika. Pika have been, classified as threatened, especially in the southern part of their distribution in areas like Arizona, New Mexico, and southern Colorado. And so we hope our little pika friends, are doing okay down in Colorado.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, thanks, David, for that question. We might have to ask Audrey because Audrey's fluent in like 3 or 4 languages. Maybe Audrey would know.
Yes, Audrey would know.
Audrey's not watching this right now, though.
That's okay.
She's doing something else.
What else we got here?
Oh, wow. This was actually a perfect segue. Michael is asking, in what elevation range do pika live? Do they live in different ranges in different areas of the country? Wow, that was like a perfect segue.
How'd you do that?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Well, great. Yeah, pika do have a variety of ranges that they live at. Here in Wyoming, I have witnessed them at 6,000 feet and 13,000 feet. I don't know. What about you, Bo?
Yeah, and like growing up in Colorado, kind of a similar 6,000 would seem a little low to me. Seems like a little warm. Yeah. Basically is what we're thinking about, right? These are really heat-sensitive animals.
Yeah.
So that's being so low, but maybe there's, these little microclimates that they've figured out, we can make this work, and you got to think, if they can make it work at maybe a lower elevation, maybe there's less competition because there's not as many pika that can make it go of it right there.
Totally.
But, usually these big rock piles are where we see them, like a talus field or anywhere... really where a lot of other animals say, this is my upper limit. I'm not going to be able to continue to go further above that tree line. And those pika can say, I got this. Here we go. I'm going to collect all this material to form these hay piles and build my food resource for the winter. And it's kind of funny when you see these big, so imagine like this, they can be like feet tall. They're huge. It kind of looks like someone's littering. Or someone's like taken, like they emptied like a weed whacker or something in these big rocks. Anywhere from 6 to 13. I've seen them at 14 in Colorado.
In Colorado.
We don't have many of those peaks here in Wyoming, but
and then the collared pika in Alaska can live even higher than here because of course Alaska has taller mountains than we do.
Yeah.
And I will say that our pika are kind of an interesting evolutionary situation. And so Pika are not originally from North America. They're actually from Asia.
Yeah.
And Asia has quite a variety of pika species, like over 30 different species of pika living typically.
Is it that many?
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
And they typically live in like the Himalayas
Yeah.
and like around the Tibetan Plateau. And in that region, you get a lot more variety in life history and survival strategies than our pika. So North America just has two different species, the American pika and the collared pika. But in Asia, with those 30 different species, they can live in like semi-tropical forests.
Yeah.
They can live on, you know, barren tundra and barren grasslands. They can live in rocky slopes. And so it's a really interesting, you know, really interesting to see how specialized our pika is when there's a variety of different life strategies in Asia. Currently, the hypothesis is that if you think about how pika came to North America, they came across Beringia, which is the Bering Land Bridge from Asia to North America. And Beringia acted, if you imagine, like a filter. Right. So like no pika that was adapted for like a warmer climate could survive in Beringia. And so when they came over, it like filtered out all the warm weather pikas and only the cold weather pikas could come over into North America. Yeah. And that is affecting the life history of pikas that we now have living on the North American continent. And so pikas in Asia can live at like 3,000 feet in like areas where they get no snow, essentially, in China, which is really insane. Yeah. But our pikas have to have really cold temperatures or they overheat. And that is a function of that spread across the Arctic tundra, across the Bering Land Bridge, which is really fascinating to me.
I'm just picturing like a tiny they're in the rabbit family. Yeah. Just a tiny, you know, little thing up there, just like in the windswept, cold. Yeah. But at like, you know, low elevation. But a similar type of harsh environment.
About the size of a guinea pig.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
There's this really interesting animal called a Tibetan fox that is specialized in feeding primarily on pika and catching them in their burrows. It is
big square head.
It's so weird looking. Yeah.
Cool.
It's like they have a cube for a head. You guys should Google Tibetan fox. They are a super interesting and strange looking animal. But thank you, Michael, for your question about pikas. Yeah. So definitely they vary in different regions, you know, as far as elevation range. I mean, on different continents, they're living at much lower elevations than here. Awesome.
If there's a question about Tibetan foxes further down in here,
oh my gosh,
that would just be the perfect.
That would be incredible. Yeah.
what
Hopefully we would know it. Lots of great answers.
Good. Okay.
How about moose?
What was that one? How are moose?
How are the moose? There we go. Libby is asking, how are the moose?
Oh man,
Bo,
moose are doing. They're so pumped right now because it's, you know, we're kind of like, it's weird to say, and this came up with my guest today of like, you're like coming out of, you're considering this like the tail end of spring. Like, yeah, this is the tail end of spring. July, because like even July 1st it snowed in Yellowstone. So we got a little dash of snow. So the moose right now, their coats are looking beautiful. They're back in this high quantity, high quality feed. So they can eat much more of that aquatic plant. They can switch to that versus all winter. They kind of fall more into that category of a browser where they're eating that wooded material, which just looks brutal. I know their stomachs are adapted for it and they got the systems, but it just looks like the aquatic plants just looks like obviously way more like hydrating and more nutrients. It's got more chlorophyll and all these things going on. So their coats are looking beautiful. Calves are out on the landscape. And while, you know, they're one of an animal that I feel like I'm always highlighted of like how feeble we are when we're born. Like baby moose calves born in the beginning of June. Now they're doing their own thing. And now they can kind of separate from mom. You know, like when they're born, a lot of our animals, it's like white on rice. It's just like, I want to stay right next to mom. But now we kind of see these calves being playful, kind of doing their own thing. So they're doing great right now. And it's cool to see them on tour. A recent mama cow elk has twins. I've only seen her once, but that's always just like, good job, mom. Way to go. So moose are doing better, just like a lot of our ungulate or hoofed animals. There's just so much more to eat, so much more room to explore. So the moose are looking good right now.
They look really beautiful, actually, with their very sleek pelt. It's almost shiny.
It is.
In the sunlight.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful, actually.
They got like a good shampoo and conditioner in there, and like everything looks shiny.
Exactly. It's like almost reflective in a way.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. One thing I've noticed is that the moose and the Tetons tend to have like much more shiny, shorter coats because it's hotter down here than they do up in Yellowstone.
Yeah.
Moose in Yellowstone tend to have thicker fur, which is really interesting. Just like a random observation I thought I'd throw in.
Yeah.
But yeah, our moose are doing great. We'll see how they continue throughout the rest of the summer because now things are starting to get a little hot.
Starting to heat up.
And so hopefully they can find those nice shady patches and get out of the sun. And we'll see them spending a lot more time in our wetlands and lakes in the coming weeks and stuff. Yeah. Well, great. Moose are doing good. And at this time of year, it doesn't look, they don't have any of those winter ticks that we've talked about in the past. Those ticks are exactly what the name implies. They're exclusive to the winter as far as like when they're on the actual moose. And so they don't really have any ticks right now and they're looking great.
Yeah.
Sweet.
And of course the male moose have their antlers going, right, with that velvet, that blood exchange up there. So they're not ready for date night yet.
Nope.
But they're preparing. They're thinking about it.
They're getting ready.
Yeah, they're trying on different outfits. Let's see what else we got.
Oh my gosh, we had so many questions.
Whoa, heck yeah.
We're going to try and fly through a couple of these real quick. Ooh, this is, we always love talking about wolves. How's the wolf population doing? Well,
what came out today, Tyler?
What is that?
Didn't the wolf report come out
today?
Yeah,
the Yellowstone Wolf Report was released today.
Today, right?
Actually, yeah. So if you guys have some free time, go and read the Yellowstone Wolf Report. And I have not read it in detail yet. I briefly glanced through it, but one thing I noticed with just my brief skim was that there was a couple new groups of wolves in Yellowstone, which is super exciting. Seems like maybe small groups, maybe pairs that have branched off and are trying to maybe start their own pack and everything, which was kind of interesting to see. As far as Wyoming in general, our wolf populations are stable, and they have been for the past 10 years or so, at about 300 animals. And in Grand Teton National Park, the population is also pretty stable. We don't have any real new packs in Grand Teton National Park that I know of this year. I will say, officially no new packs in Grand Teton National Park. We think there is one new pack, but it hasn't been like officially announced yet. But being on the ground every single day with lots of eyes, 26 guides, heading out into the field, we do see some pretty cool stuff. And so we think there is another wolf pack that's being established. We'll see if that's officially announced down the road. Fingers crossed.
Part of the fun is like the guessing.
Yeah.
Like what? Did you get a video of that one and it doesn't have the same kind of striping that one did? So it must be from over there.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool to see how that all works out.
Down in Grand Teton, it's a little different than Yellowstone. We don't have wolf technicians that are out there every single day who professionally identify wolves. And so we have to really rely on our own skills and our own identification abilities to learn who these individual wolves are and to track them across the landscape. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult, but a little bit more fun, in my opinion. As someone who loves to solve and figure out what the animals are doing on the landscape, I think it's a lot of fun. So wolf populations are doing good. We had some really big packs in Grand Teton this year, including the Two Oceans pack at around 12 wolves, 12 adults, and then the Lower Grovant pack, which in the fall numbered 17, and then that dropped down to 12 by the spring. And that's because one wolf died and then a couple wolves dispersed and left the pack. But those are really big pack sizes for Grand Teton. Yellowstone tends to have bigger packs than Grand Teton, but those are above average for us. And so pretty exciting. We've got a lot of wolves on the landscape. And this past winter was one of the best wolf watching winters I've ever had. Like, it was like wolves in the park like every day. I'm really hoping this winter is the same as it was last year.
Tyler and I spent a lot of time standing in very cold pieces of concrete because it was so worth it. It was so amazing to see these animals move on the landscape. We're looking through scopes that are far away. But yeah, fingers crossed for next winter.
My cold tolerance skyrocketed this winter because Bo and I would just stand there for hours looking and then sometimes watching the wolves, which was super fun. Well, great. We're going to try and get through a couple of these questions.
What else we got?
We got, is there, from Pamela, is there a herd of bison in the Gros Ventre area? So in the Gros Ventre River area, or the Gros Ventre Mountains is what I assume you're asking. No, there are no wild bison up the Gros Ventre Valley, and there are no bison in the Gros Ventre Mountains. There are only bison in the national parks, which is really interesting from a conservation standpoint.
Yeah.
You know, bison used to be pretty ubiquitous across the entire landscape of North America, you know, found from Mexico to Alaska. They were a common feature, and now they are primarily in national parks and on private reserves. And so, no, there are no bison up there. That area is all private land and national forest, and I hope, you know, sometime in the future, actually that bison would be allowed in the Gros Ventre.
Cool.
That'd be so cool. And for me, that region would be one of the best places for bison to exist outside of a national park, because there's very limited livestock grazing. There's a lot of predators back there, which could help control the bison's natural population.
Yep.
And there's less private land than in like other areas in Wyoming.
Yeah.
And so of all the places, I feel like the Gros Ventre would be a great spot for them. It's also really enclosed. So you've got a bunch of different mountain ranges surrounding.
Wyoming range.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, the Gros Ventre Mountains kind of act as like the eastern boundary, kind of loose eastern boundary to Grand Teton National Park. So like right opposite of the Grand Teton, the big tall one, right? You're looking at the Gros Ventre Mountains, which aren't as sassy and dramatic as the Tetons, but they're the other side.
They're pretty big though. Like
they're
big when you get in there.
But from the outside, they look like rolling hills, but in there it's rugged.
Definitely.
Good bison country.
And good territory for a lot of other animals like grizzly bears and wolverines, actually, which is pretty cool. Yeah. And the reason I feel like that area would be really good is because of those mountains. That they almost like form a natural corral.
Yeah, totally.
To prevent the bison from like leaving that area.
Yeah.
And so we'll have to see, you know, what happens. There's been a lot of push to establish bison outside of the national parks.
Right.
We'll have to see what happens in the future.
Cool.
If you ever get a chance to go backpacking in the Gros Ventre area, definitely do. Bring some bear spray for sure.
Bring bear spray and some Gore-Tex layers for mosquitoes. Yeah, it can be brutal back there, but so beautiful.
It's a really cool spot.
Yeah.
One of my favorite places in all of Teton County, in all of Wyoming, really. Yeah, it's a really cool spot. Awesome. How is the water level this year at Jackson Lake? We are like full. We are at complete capacity, which is really exciting because I'm sure if you guys have been watching our broadcast for a while now, you will have known that the lake levels in Jackson Lake have fluctuated quite a bit. Yeah. You know, from almost being empty to being completely full. And this is the first year since my first year guiding. I think 2020 was when the lake levels were completely full last time. And so it's been 4 years since the lake has been full. And I don't know if you agree with this. I think it's a combination of like really good runoff from last year. Yep. And then just keeping that over from the winter and then having good snow melt and rainfall this winter as well.
Yes. And like late snowfall this year too. Big, heavy. We got a lot of snow late February, early March, and that's typically when we see more water content come into our snowpack. And so that really helped boost that layer.
And I think a lot of the reservoirs are at capacity right now. So down the Snake River, there's a bunch of different reservoirs that store water for irrigation in Idaho. So Jackson Lake Dam is one of them. There's also Palisades Reservoir and Riley Reservoir. Yeah. And all of these lakes hold water to then release and give to the agricultural community over in Idaho. And so it's kind of like a positive feedback loop. When the reservoirs simultaneously go down in water, it almost becomes like a more desperate situation. Yeah. And they then take more water from the lakes. Right. And I think that's compounded by drought too. So if we have like a dry summer where there's no rain at all, plus low snowpack, that's going to lower the lakes even more. And so, but currently we're sitting in like a really good position as far as lake levels.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Jackson Lake Dam is really beautiful to go look at right now.
It is. It's pumping.
It's almost like a man-made waterfall at this point. Yeah. But it's really cool to go and check out, especially with the Tetons behind it.
Yeah. Good pelicans down there too.
Really good pelicans.
Okay, we got one more maybe.
Ooh, yeah, Libby. So no CWD with moose. That's great. Yeah, so there has not been a confirmed case of moose having CWD. There was a confirmed case of a moose having CWD in Lincoln County, which is the county just south of us. Moose are really interesting. So CWD is a prion that affects basically all members of the deer family. But what is interesting is moose seem to have a lot more resistance to CWD than other members of the deer family, which is really interesting. They can live with it a lot longer than elk can and then what deer can. For deer, it kills them pretty quick. For elk, it's a little bit longer. And then for moose, it takes a really long time. Yeah. And it's pretty rare for them to catch it.
Yeah.
And that could be a function of, behavior. It could be that they have a physiological resistance to it. I think it's a combination of both.
It's gotta be both. Right?
Yeah.
That lack of social aspect, right? They're not just walking continually and continually over all the places that the other elk or deer have walked.
Yeah.
They can have that solo mentality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we think about how CWD spreads, it spreads through the environment. It also spreads from physical contact from elk to elk, from deer to deer, typically through some sort of mucus or saliva. And since moose are more solitary and they don't spend a whole lot of time socializing like other deer and elk do, they might just not catch it as much. They're spending more time apart from one another, and so that transmission rate goes down. And then they don't interact typically with elk or other deer species. And so I think that transmission rate is just super low, which is one of the reasons why they don't get it. Yeah, and so as of now, there have been no moose in Wyoming or in this part of Wyoming that have had CWD. In Colorado, they definitely do get it, and there's been a couple cases in Wyoming where they get it, but they tend to be doing a lot better in surviving that disease,
which is good.
Yeah. Well, awesome, guys. Oh my gosh, I think let's just do one more question. We're going over a little bit in time, but I don't want to leave one question unanswered.
Okay.
And so Mark is asking, any talk about wildlife bridges being built in Grand Teton or Yellowstone National Park to address the roadside incidences being reported? Ooh, this is a good one. So, as of now, there are no plans to construct wildlife crossings in the national parks. And there's a couple of reasons for that, or at least reasons that I believe are for that. It's because, we really do want animals to follow their natural migration pathways to cross the highways. And in some cases, building those in national parks would restrict their movement even more so. It would actually harm them more than it would actually help them. In a lot of places where these wildlife crossings are being built, it's in areas where there is such a high influence of wild animals moving through that area that it would actually negatively affect their population if there was nothing done about it. And so the national parks have tried to take on a different strategy as far as managing these roadside collisions. Instead of building things like wildlife fencing and wildlife crossings, they're trying to manage the people a lot more, which is really tough because there are...
Tough critter.
Yeah, the humans are a really tough critter. For our national parks, typically with these roadside incidences, they tend to try and manage the people instead of the wildlife. And that is pretty exclusive to Grand Teton and Yellowstone. In other national parks, in other parts of the country, and in areas like Canada, other countries, they do more of an aggressive management approach towards wildlife. But our local parks here try to manage people, and so that means patrolling the roads a lot more, having pretty steep fines. If you hit an animal in a national park, you do get a pretty steep ticket for that. And then education seems to be the thing that they're pushing for the most. And actually, there are some PhD students who are currently experimenting with different signs in Grand Teton National Park. Along the main highway through Grand Teton, there's a couple of spots where they've been posting signs with different sayings, different colors. And basically what they're doing is they're testing to see if those signs and those phrases work better or worse for, the type of drivers going through that area? Does a certain color, does a certain phrase really catch the eye of the driver and actually cause them to slow down? Past those signs, they do have a speedometer that is measuring everyone's speed going past that sign. And they are placed in areas where there is a lot of wildlife conflict.
Yeah.
And so short answer is no, they're not working on building wildlife fences or bridges in the national park, but they're trying some different strategies to see if those will work. There are plans to build some wildlife fences off of the National Elk Refuge that are a couple years out from now. It sounds like they've got to get some more funding for those projects. These projects are incredibly expensive.
Lots of players involved, whether it be a state agency and then a federal public agency is involved. And then, of course, the regional area that it's taking place. So, like, Teton County has to be involved. The city, if it's going to be close enough to town, is probably involved in there, looking at all of those impacts. I know one other thing that we'll do here in the Tetons, right, is we'll maybe mark off areas, maybe like for bears or where moose tend to cross. Here's kind of a coned area that might be seasonal. But like in this season, when we tend to see more activity, we're going to slow people down. We'll drop that speed limit and put these cones. And just as that another layer as you're coming through of like, ooh, okay, this is like a different sign and the cones, I'm just going to take a break and go slower through here, which can help as well. But that's an interesting one. There are a lot of folks in like the social world, like Tyler's explaining, to look at like what values or what messaging works well with different visitors. And different visitors that might be folks who are coming for a 10-day wildlife safari trip and they want to see all the animals, or one visitor could be, I'm driving between here and Custer State Park in the Dakotas, and I'm driving through Grand Teton once. So it's hard to hit all those same variables at the same time, but interesting that we're doing the research for it.
And the Jackson Hole Wildlife Foundation did put up some moose cutouts along the Moose Wilson Road, and those seem to be working. Statistically, the amount of moose and animals getting hit in those areas has gone down ever since those were placed. Same with I forget exactly what they're called, but the motion sensing warnings, where they actually sense animals through motion detection crossing the highway, and then those signs pop up to warn people that there's animals on the road. And so both of those seem to be working in that specific area. Not to say that would work everywhere in our region, but in that specific spot it would work. It is working. So there are many different methods to tackle this problem, but it is something that we need to solve because a lot of animals are getting hit in the national parks, and it's only increasing as visitor use increases and as wildlife populations increase in the area. Well, thank you all so much for sticking with us for that last question and for joining in for Wildlife Wednesday. We're super happy that you all continue to come and visit us, especially our longtime viewers like Don and Michael and Mark. I see your names almost every single broadcast, and it makes us super happy that you keep returning. Nice. It is really nice. It's like our monthly check-in. Wildlife check-in. Exactly. But we're gonna say goodbye for now. Happy 4th of July, everyone. And we'll see you next month in August for another Wildlife Wednesday monthly roundup. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Adios.